everyone. I'm Tiffany. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the CEO and founder of Diversability. I have the honor of moderating this next session that is titled Master Collaborators, What Disabled People Can Teach All of Us About Working Together. In this conversation, what we're going to do is we're going to explore how we can shift the leadership paradigm so that disabled people actually hold leadership positions and are able to help influence and change how we move about the way we work. And so I'm super excited to bring onto the stage our extremely amazing panelists. I would love each one to introduce themselves and share where they're joining in from, because we do have an international panel. I'm in San Francisco, and what you're interested, what brought you to this topic. Christina, why don't you go first?
Oh, hi, I'm Christina Ryan. I'm the CEO and founder of the Disability Leadership Institute. I'm based in Canberra, which is the capital city of Australia. I realise that if we don't have disabled people in leadership positions, we're really not going to shift the culture. We're not going to get inclusion. So I founded the Disability Leadership Institute 5 years ago, and I'm loving it.
Awesome. Thanks, Christina. And very apt organization you run for this conversation. Martin, what about you?
Hi there. Yep, I'm Martin. I'm in Cambridgeshire in the UK. So we're in the evening. I love this whole global panelist feel here. I'm the co-founder of Purple Goat Agency, which is a specialist disability marketing agency. I have a disability myself since birth. I've always needed the use of a power wheelchair and the sort of daily care assistance for sort of getting around and about and having full independence. And professionally, I would say that I'm a really cool and exciting cross-section of entrepreneurship, social media marketing, and disability and inclusion. So really excited to be here and talk all things leadership.
Awesome. And Martin and I know I've been following your work for years, and all of the incredible work you do around the inclusive design space, and the fact that you did co-found a company that was eventually acquired by Airbnb. Charlotte, last but not least, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Good to see everybody. My name is Charlotte McClain-Nhlapo. I am a Black woman. I am a woman with a disability. I use a wheelchair, a manual wheelchair that you can't see because of the screen. And I'm wearing a black turtleneck with a silver necklace. I wear glasses to read, and typically wear hoops, and I have my hair tied back in a big puff. I'm a lawyer by training, and currently I am the Global Disability Advisor for the World Bank Group. So super happy to be part of this discussion.
Awesome. Thank you. Welcome, Charlotte, and welcome everyone. So I figured the way that we would structure this conversation is we're going to start kind of zoomed out, and then we're going to zoom in. And of course, we want to keep it as tactical and as actionable as possible. So if you have any of those little nuggets, you can sprinkle them in. And then to close the whole conversation at the end, I'll try and summarize some of the takeaways as well. And so again, if we're thinking about the title of this panel, what can disabled people teach us all about working together, and how can we shift the leadership paradigm to include people with disabilities? Let's start talking about disability leadership. Why aren't we seeing more disabled people become leaders in the workplace? And are there any disabled leaders who are doing it well? Should I pick someone? Charlotte, let's start with you.
So, I mean, I think it's a really great question, but I would rephrase that question a bit, because I think there are increasingly a lot more persons with disabilities that are taking on leadership roles. And I think what's often the case is that people have invisible disabilities, so we might not even know that they have a disability. I work globally, so I see leaders who are persons with disabilities in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia. I know numerous members of parliament who are persons with disabilities. We have Senator Tammy Duckworth and others here. We have a current sitting president who has a disability in Ecuador. The former vice president of Argentina was a woman with a disability. In Canada, we have a minister with a disability. So, I really think that we are beginning to see persons with disabilities in positions of leadership. I think for me, the question is, why are people with disabilities not having more opportunities? Because I think the issue really is about who gets the opportunity. And if you haven't had the opportunity to get to school, get an education, and if you continue to face endless stigma and discrimination, then that's what's holding you back. It's not your disability, it's the system and the space around you that's keeping you out.
I love that. I've heard before that people will say disability is not the problem, ableism is. Charlotte, Martin, do you have anything you want to add on to that?
Yeah, I suppose just pondering some thoughts, and very much agree with what Charlotte had said there previously, but building on it, I think that the history of disability rights is fascinating. When we look at all sort of civil rights struggles, I think disability rights has, maybe been a bit later on in the party than some of those other fights, but in the end, they take a very similar trajectory. And we look at the 70s and 80s of the independent living movement, and obviously eventually there was the legal side of having the Equalities Act as it now is in the UK, the ADA in the USA, and that's obviously not in every country globally. There are still countries that are fighting those fights at the moment. But I think we have to just understand that where there wasn't those political and legal protection, that was the first step. I think that as things have improved, and I'm living in the UK and obviously speaking more to that experience, education was the next battleground. And I think there's been, like, I went to mainstream school, I went to the university, there's maybe been more accessibility and inclusion in education. And so then we go into the workplace, and as Charlotte said, we are actually seeing more disabled leaders. And I think in the end, it's coming back to those opportunities, removing the barriers, and really just empowering everybody to be their best self, whether they're disabled or not, but having that nuanced discussion about the social model barriers that we talk a lot, and how we pull down barriers or overcome those barriers that ultimately are what I know I feel disabled by, these societal barriers. So there's a lot in there for me about barriers and understanding the history of disability rights.
Christina, what about you? You run the Disability Leadership Institute.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And I think Charlotte's raised some really important points about prejudice and stigma. I call it prejudice. I'm a bit overt about these things. I'm not going to be polite about prejudice. What we've seen a lot is there's at the Disability Leadership Institute is this real ceiling point. There's this suspicion that disabled people can't go beyond a certain point because we're just not up for it. And so we have quite a number of people who have achieved senior positions, but once their disability has become evident, or they've become open about it, openly identified, that they've lost their position. And what that tells me is that there's still this prejudice around whether disabled people are capable of leadership. I think we need to really challenge that assumption, and we really need to start questioning people and putting them on the spot about, how is it you think that I'm not up for this? And it's interesting, the three of us on the panel are all wheelchair users. I'm a power wheelchair user as well. And that's something you can see as soon as someone comes into the room. And so the prejudice hits us in the face. But for people who have invisible disabilities or less obvious disabilities, it can be the case that you're actually having to make that choice. Do I openly identify, or do I keep it to myself? Because it can be a career-ending decision. And particularly, Charlotte cited several political leaders, and it's fantastic that we've got some. We still have very, very few globally. When you're talking about 15% of the global population, we don't have 15% of global politicians and leaders. We need to be getting to that point, and something that I'm starting to push for is, this is our year, guys. Let's insist that the person who comes next after you in a position is a disabled person. And if they aren't, why not?
I love that. So I want to just bring everything that all of you said into the next question, which is, over the past couple of decades, and Martin said this, we started to see political and legal protections. I'm here in the US, even after 30 years of the Americans with Disabilities Act, the unemployment rate is still hovering around 60 to 70% within our community. Charlotte Christina mentioned that for people who were reaching levels of leadership, once they disclosed their disability, they faced the ramifications of it and ended up losing that position, which I think lends us to Charlotte's question of the reframing of my first question, which is, why are disabled people not having more opportunities, right? And here in the US, I'm seeing just so much more conversation and consciousness around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I would love to see how we can bring disability into that conversation. And so as we go about, this is a conference about the largest conference about diversity. And I'm so glad that disability has a panel here and we're represented across a couple of the different sessions. But I'm curious if people come to you, like, what is the business case for disability inclusion? Like, what are the data points you're saying? If you're going to your DEI or your clients, your diversity, equity, inclusion practitioners, what are you telling them that they need to do? What is that business case for disability inclusion? Martin, why don't we start with you?
Sure.
Oh, sorry, Christina. Or
I am going to jump in there because one of my favourite shares, which I regularly send to CEOs, government department leaders, is a Harvard Business article I read a couple of years ago, which showed us that disabled people are 10% more innovative in the workplace than other people. Now, why wouldn't you want that? We've all got this need for innovation. We're looking at agility in workplaces, flexibility. 2020 was the year of mixing it up and doing work differently. And yet the people who are going to be 10% more innovative than your other workforce are not there. Why wouldn't you be using us? Bring us in. It's clearly a really good case for having a diverse workforce, but particularly a diverse workforce with disabled people in it.
I would like 10% more innovation.
Yeah, it's interesting. Christina definitely speaks to the, I've seen a lot myself, the almost rise in entrepreneurship in disabled people. And I think there's an unfortunate side in terms of some people are becoming self-employed freelance entrepreneurs because there's a lack of opportunity and inclusion in the workplace, so that they're doing it more through necessity. But it definitely speaks more broadly and more positively to the point Christina said, that we're a resilient bunch and we're an innovative bunch. And so there's definitely this area of untapping talent and value that disabled people have. And I think to the question about the business case, the numbers are there: 1.3 billion approximately disabled people globally. There was research that suggested it was about $8 trillion global spending power. And obviously when we're talking about employment, it's back to the same point. It's a group of people with a very unique and powerful and helpful perspective that many businesses should be benefiting from. So I think when we change the narrative from the charity model and the sort of welfare model that we still need, because there's the gap and there has to be that support network. But when we change the narrative to consumers and employees and we speak to the economics of it, there's more of a win-win narrative and the carrot rather than just the stick, which I think previously it was a lot more of stick. And I think it's good to use the stick and the carrot in equal measures.
Oh, Charlotte, what are the conversations you're having at the World Bank?
I did want to pick up on something that Martin had said, because I absolutely agree that there's the issue of resilience and certainly innovation. But I also don't want people to think that every single person with a disability has great innovation, because that person may just be a very good worker, or maybe not such a great worker. So I think the argument for me is to say, if you're serious about diversity and inclusion, you have to be thinking about persons with disabilities, because we are part of the diverse humankind. And I think that for me is a case to be made. I think what we've typically seen is that when we talk about diversity inclusion, we talk about gender, we may talk about race, We talk about increasingly talking about sexual orientation and gender identity, but often the disability discussion is not being had. And so we're really trying to push that discussion further. Within the bank, the case that I make for like the business case for disability is pretty straightforward. Like both of my colleagues have said, we make up 15% of the world's population and probably much more than that. And if we're not included in initiatives, development initiatives, in development programming, we're not going to meet the goals that we've set ourselves. The world has put in place 17 sustainable development goals that seek to ensure that everybody has access to a range of different services. And if we're not including 15% of the world's population, there's no way we can sit back and say we've addressed those goals. So for me, it's very much about equity. And then, as Martin has pointed out, it's also absolutely about rights. We have the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities that gives me the right to have the opportunity to seek employment and to be gainfully employed. And I think we need to think about that in totality and not just think about persons with disabilities as coming in as these superhuman beings. We have many of those, but the story is much bigger than that.
I love that, Charlotte. And I always try to highlight that the disability community is not a monolith. Exactly. And I think being able to incorporate all of those, but I love that the 10% more innovation. I'm hearing, the 15+% of the world's population that we hold, the disposable spending income that we have of $8 trillion. Who wouldn't want part of that $8 trillion? I'll just take 1 or 2 million of it. But I want to come back. I'm gonna go a little bit off script here. But one of the things I often bring up is there's a 2018 Accenture report. And again, I have a very US perspective here, where it highlights that if just 1% more of people with disabilities join the labor force, that could unlock $25 billion of GDP. And, again, I feel like what I feel very hopeful about is more and more research becoming available with this community, because I think for such a long time, we just didn't have as much data and there wasn't as much research being done. But I really want to dig into this point that that Christina had brought up around disability leaders really rising the ranks and then disclosing their disability and facing the repercussions of it. Like, what does anyone know? And this is just me being curious, like what needs to change in order for, because what that is perpetuating to me is fear around disclosing disability.
Something, I'm going to jump in again. I'm a big jumper in it. Something that I've really become interested in is, why do we want diversity anyway? What's the point of diversity? And we've talked about it a little bit with the innovation option, 10% more innovation. And as Charlotte rightly says, it's not everybody. We're not a homogenous group, disabled people. But if you want diversity, it means you actually want the difference of people in the room. And something that I see repeatedly with organisations, government agencies, companies, all sorts of workforces, is that people of diversity come into those workforces and then they're required to assimilate with the culture of that organisation. So their difference, their diversity is not being used or harnessed. We're not yet good at understanding how disability is an asset in the workplace. Those particular strengths and qualities of disabled people, and we're all different, of course, but what have we got that we're bringing in? Martin mentioned resilience. It's a classic, but the reality is many of us are highly resilient folk, but there's plenty of other things. The innovation is one, the capacity to be flexible, to go with the flow, and of course, the capacity to collaborate. Many of us are used to working alongside others because we're not in a position to operate independently, fully independently. And again, I refer to the fact that most of the people on this panel are people who probably use supports of various kinds. So why are we using diversity if we're not using it? If it's in the room, we want to be using it. So I think there is a barrier when people get more senior, they're not assimilating, or it's feared they're unable to assimilate, or because they may have adjustments, they're not going to work in the same way. But actually, you don't want them to work in the same way, because that's what brings diversity and operating differently and the innovation into the room. So I think it is actually about inflexibility of others, the inability to see what diversity brings to a room. We're still not very good at understanding that. We all talk about it. We all think about inclusion. We all throw these words around, but we're not actually doing them.
So I'm just going to push back on that a little bit and say, what should they be doing?
Well, using us. It doesn't matter who you are and what diversity group you come from. And, you know, hey, highly intersectional panel here, really exciting. We're all bringing different things to the room. We're all bringing different experiences. So we don't want everyone to turn up in a workplace and behave like able-bodied white people. It's not useful. It isn't going to be what produces the best outcomes. It certainly isn't going to be bringing those different perspectives that Charlotte was just talking about. If we leave those behind, we're not going to achieve the goals of the company, the bottom line. We're not going to achieve the goals of government. We're not going to achieve the goals of the global community. We're going to be stuck running a world of able-bodied white people. Not sure that's really useful. It's what we've been doing, and it's what's got us to here. We need to be changing. This is about mixing it up. It's about using diversity, about harnessing what we've got as diverse people. In this case, about disabled people.
I love that, and I love the sentiment of being okay with a little bit of friction in the beginning. Charlotte, it looked like you wanted to chime in here.
I did want to chime in, and just to perhaps amplify a point, and that is that I think in order for us to begin to see those changes, one of the things we need to do is insist on having metrics that include persons with disabilities at all levels, including at leadership. I think if we look at how, women have risen and that has been tracked in institutions, that seems to have worked in some ways. So I really think for disability, we need to see how many CEOs do we have that are persons with disabilities? How many board members on various boards are persons with disabilities? Those types of metrics, I think, is really what we need to start collecting, because that then helps us with the narrative. It gives us the data to really tell the story of what's happening.
Martin, what about you?
Yeah, it's very much building on what we've been discussing, but I think on the kind of business side, the employer side, the brand side, from the general business point, I think that there's a lot of fear. I think, we've had the fight for inclusion and the sort of using that word purposefully, the sort of fight. And in many ways, there is a fight that still continues. But I feel that there's a point at which some brands are so scared of saying the wrong thing and doing the wrong thing for almost being metaphorically lynched because it's not politically correct, that in and of itself is a big barrier. And I think on the other side, from the disabled community side, I think that we sometimes fall into the trap of trying to assimilate and trying to conform, and there we actually lose the power. Everyone's been saying on the panelists today that difference, that diversity is everybody's unique value. And so as a society, we need to understand that difference is brilliant and we want to harness difference, but there has to be a safe environment on both sides of the coin, or the barrier that there currently is, for that to be achieved. So we need to remove the fear, I think.
Yeah, I feel like I'm hearing two themes here. And one is around the need for data collection and transparency about what's really going on. But at the same time, pair that with, I think it's like doing away with cancel culture and being compassionate toward organizations that are really trying to celebrate diversity. So I feel like we spent a good amount of time kind of like surveying the landscape. I want to bring a COVID lens into this. Charlotte, I might start with you. I just want to better understand, now that we have been in this pandemic for 9 or 10 months, what is working from a disability perspective and what is not working?
Well, thank you so much for the question, Tiffany. I mean, I think one of the things we're learning about COVID-19 is that there's, as a global community, is we're learning a lot of lessons. And what we're learning is that this is not just a health crisis, but that it's very much an economic crisis. And when we also know that persons with disabilities across the world are often the poorest of the poor. And so one of the concerns around this is that COVID is highlighting the fact that persons with disabilities are more likely to contract the virus and often more likely to be excluded from work. So I think that it's a really important point to think about using the COVID lens when we think about disability inclusion. And I think, you know, given that many of us are working from home and many of us are using technologies, this is an apt time to think about the importance of using technology to be more inclusive for persons with disabilities. And I think what's been interesting is that persons with disabilities have for many years asked to work from home or have sought to have home-based work. And in some instances that has been denied. And all of a sudden we have the whole, you know, most of the world at home using the very devices that people have been asking to use, you know, pre-pandemic. So I think there's some lessons to be learned there. And I think it's, you know, a point that Christina made. It's about the flexibility and it's about the empathy. If somebody says to you, look, I think I work better from home, you as an employer should be able to make a plan to enable that person to do his or her work from home. So I think, you know, there's a lot to be learned from COVID-19. And I think we have to be very watchful as to what happens going forward. I think there's serious issues around equity in terms of who gets vaccinations. And so that's a whole other part of it. But I'm also very conscious of the fact that, you know, where there've been layoffs, in many instances, those have been persons with disabilities. And so we need to be watching the space, researching the space to ensure that we're collecting the data on the numbers of persons with disabilities that have been laid off as a result of COVID-19 or who are at further harm's way as a result of the pandemic.
Thanks, Charlotte. To highlight what I heard, I heard that technology should be used as an opportunity to advance inclusion, and the disability community, many of us have been advocating for work from home, flexible environments, and COVID, due to a pandemic, that has helped enable that. But at the same time, many of the industries, I would say probably hospitality is the largest one, that do employ a lot of disabled people, are being hard hit. I'd love to bring Christina and Martin into the conversation. Do you have any additional thoughts of what you think the opportunity and the challenges that COVID has brought in? Christina, we'll start with you.
I think this has really highlighted why disability leadership, as I call it, is so critical. We have had example after example across many, many countries where disabled people have not been in those decision-making rooms and forums, particularly government ones. So governments responding to the pandemic have had a lack of disability presence. In Australia, that critically meant that the government plan, the pandemic plan that was built this time last year, didn't mention disability once. Not once. We had to battle, the disability rights movement had to battle for 6 weeks, really hard, drop everything else and battle on that front to get it mentioned, to get a disability pandemic plan alongside the other pandemic plan for the whole of government. It really highlighted what happens when we're not in the room, we get forgotten. When we're forgotten, it isn't just about rights and about what should happen. It's also about economy. How much does it cost to do that backtracking, to do retrofitting? How much does it cost for everyone to down tools and to then have to recover an entire space and get government turned towards it? It's what happens when there are no disabled people in the senior decision-making positions in those government agencies. It's what happens when we're not even in the consultative forums. So it really highlights the pandemic's given us an opportunity to understand how disability leadership is so critical to good government. Without it, without us being in the room, it costs serious money. It costs lives potentially. So we've learned some serious lessons from the pandemic in that regard. Hopefully governments learned them too. I'm not quite confident they've got there yet, but we know now, and we have some serious examples. And previously, Charlotte mentioned data. If we're not collecting data about where people are, about what they're doing, about the types of positions they're holding, and about the impact, and disaggregating that in an intersectional way, then we don't know what's happening. And we're not as effective in government and in corporate responsibility. We're spending money, we're splashing it around, we don't know what we're doing with it, we're not as in control. So we've learned some really good lessons about how we can be economically more responsible and how we can actually do better planning if we've got leaders, disabled people in the room.
That's powerful. What I'm hearing is, again, another cosign for how important data is, but also what happens when disability becomes an afterthought, right? And the repercussions of that. Martin, let's bring you in. Do you have any thoughts here about COVID's impact and the opportunities and challenges presented for the disability community?
Yeah, a lot of thoughts, and there's a lot to unpack. It's, as ever, it's very complicated. I kind of observed two narratives that are kind of contradictory, because in some parts of the community, I remember hearing that if you look at sort of studying, working and leisure time, there were so many different examples where there were reasons that disabled people wanted the ability to do one or all of those parts of life from home. And then we saw with the pandemic that because the mass population needed and wanted that, suddenly there were theatre production streamed to home, there was studying remotely, there was working remotely. And so I definitely feel that there was a narrative that was, okay, better late than never, but there are opportunities to do more from home. So that's one more positive side. Obviously, the contradictory side is that those people with a disability are more susceptible to the virus. In the UK, the government labelled that group, of which I'm part of, vulnerable, which in and of itself is not my preferred word to label a group of people when we're trying to generally, change the narrative that we have value and contribution to society. And actually, I'm hearing that of the layoffs and redundancies, there is a higher incidence of disabled people that are losing work as a result of the economic impact. So it feels like it's maybe not been the positive upside that we might have seen when things begun, but there's still an opportunity that we can sort of, as we look at digital inclusion particularly, make sure everybody's included and just start to reflect. And as things come back, we bounce back with the new world, whatever that starts to look like. It's fundamental that disabled people are in the room. I'm going to quote Hamilton for the Hamilton fans now, but in the room where it happened. And previously, disabled people are just never part of the decision-making progress and process, and that's part of the problem.
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing from this is, number one, just how powerful and how influential we can be when we come together, even if it's disability community and our allies. And then the second is, I think that the language we use really can be disempowering or empowering for our community. So oftentimes when I've heard others talk about the disability community and other underestimated communities, they'll reference us as at the margins. And in a way, I'm like, well, we're not really at the margins. We're right here. Like we want to be like, we're in. And so I know we're kind of closing up the session. I want to do one bullet question, and then I'll come back and we'll do actionable takeaways. But I would love just like a tweet length about for those who are watching this, who no matter where they are in their disability inclusion journey, maybe a lot of people might be at the very beginning of their journey. What is one actionable takeaway or one action that they can take today to really be better better advocates for our community within their organizations? Martin, why don't we start with you?
Tweetable, hey? I think it's got to be something around, hiring disabled people, promoting to leadership level, if we're talking about leadership, and generally just surround yourself with disabled people that can guide you on the journey.
It's great. Charlotte?
So I'm not going to repeat what Martin is. I'm going to retweet Martin. And in my retweet, I'll say, watch Crip Camp, which is a brilliant Netflix movie that really begins to give you some background of the disability rights movement in the United States, but that it's, it's a movement that's across the world. And listen, speak to a person with a disability, reach out to a family member who has a disability, listen to what he or she or they have to say, and begin your journey by listening.
Christina?
And adding to the thread, who's in the room with you? It's important to look around. Disabled people are here, so we're able to be found. Why aren't we in the room with you? And if we're not there, make it happen. Get some people in.
I love that. I'm going to retweet all three of those. My call to action is always around hiring disabled people as well, to retweet what Martin said. Watching Crip Camp, always a good idea. It's available for free on YouTube. If you don't have a Netflix account, there really is no excuse. If you have 90 minutes, check it out on YouTube. Right. I also love listening, and I'll combine that with a little bit of self-reflection with what Christina said around really thinking about who's not in the room. And I think oftentimes when people show up, like, we're forgotten, right? We're this afterthought. So here's the $1 million question. We're back to the actionable takeaways. I want to come back to a theme that I think we started, and Martin touched on this a little bit, which is, as disabled people, we can up-level ourselves as much as possible, right? I have a master's degree. I'm sure all of you have, lots of accolades as well. And so I'm really curious if you have any ideas of, because what I think actually needs to shift, not is us, because we are awesome. It is the hearts and minds around how people view disability. And so Martin mentioned this, and so I'm becoming really curious, and this comes back to this whole idea around disability leadership, which is, do you have any actionable ideas of how we can shift from a charity model, which is disabled people are the beneficiaries and the recipients of charity, to a more social model where it's like, how can we really value diversity, right? Really do that reflection of why we care about diversity, and if we are, promoting diversity and inclusion, which research has showed 90% of companies claim to prioritize diversity and inclusion, but only 4% are making their offerings actually inclusive of disability. So I'm curious, like, how that shift has to happen.
I'm going to go on this one first and start off by saying that, I think we have to demystify this notion of having staff with disability with us. So that's the big piece. Just, get past that. A lot of people feel uncomfortable. They've never worked with a person with disability. They don't know what to do. So get past that stage is the first part. The other thing that I really think is important is the point that I've been making around having the data and the analytics in place. In an institution like ours, that's the currency. It's the data. If you're able to go in and say, this is how many people we have in our employ, that tells a story. These are the numbers of persons with disabilities that we're reaching in our projects or not, tells the story. So having the data and having the analysis really helps build that economic case for the inclusion of persons with disabilities.
Great, thank you. Martin, Christina, Martin.
Yeah, I'll go next, thank you. I guess ultimately I've ended up in the digital marketing space, and it's because I believe social media gives people a voice. When we look historically, there's always been an element of gatekeepers, and disabled or not, right? There's always been that notion of having to get through the gatekeepers, and social media has democratized that. We all get some of the downside and the dark side of social media, and that has to be managed. But for me personally and professionally, it's been a very positive experience of how just telling your individual story and connecting with other disabled people, building community, and ultimately bridging. I think the biggest part, what we need to do is bridge, whether it's public sector, private sector, even charity sector, it's bridging what has been a bit of a divide or a big divide with the disabled community. And I feel that social media just offers that tool to take control of narratives, change the narrative, change culture. Doesn't happen in an hour, a day, or a week. It does take a bit of time. But, with Purple Goat, we're seeing some really amazing results by partnering with brands and doing amazing stuff with disabled influencers to just change that narrative.
I love that. Christina, what about you?
Embrace disability as an asset. Diversity is actually so enriching. It's so exciting. Charlotte talked about the fear factor, and I think she's right. People are always a bit frightened of change. But one of the things that's been most enriching in my life has been knowing people who aren't like me, knowing people who look different, knowing people who operate differently, who come from different backgrounds. It is absolutely the most enriching experience in your existence. Bringing that into the workplace, it means you're working in teams where the ideas are far richer. Embrace diversity, but particularly embrace disability as an asset, because that's what it is. It's another perspective, another way of being. I wouldn't want to be without it.
I love that. Before I do takeaways, I wanted to open it up to our amazing panelists if they had anything else they wanted to say that we didn't get to touch on. I feel like we could talk about this for hours. I wanted to dig into so many of these other things more, but yeah, if there's one other message you weren't able to get across, I just wanted to open it up.
I suppose one thought I've got is around positivity. I think we're living in a very challenging time with the pandemic. I think disability has always been, some refer to as the poor cousin in diversity and inclusion progress. So there's a lot to be negative and angry and frustrated about, and it's totally understandable. But I'm a big believer in, if we can paint a future that works for everybody, particularly for disabled people being included in society, that optimism and that positivity is very powerful. And it's a way we can galvanize things to a better place.
I would just add to that I think they are, notwithstanding the pandemic and all the issues and challenges we've talked about, I think the pandemic does bring the possibility to build back better. And I think, when we look at our programming, when we look at our hiring, this is the opportunity to really reflect on our diversity, to celebrate it, to amplify it, and as Christina says, and to embrace it. But I think also beyond just the work, bringing on workers with disabilities, is also to think about the spaces in which we work. How are they designed? Are they designed for most people, or are they designed for a certain type of people? And I'm hoping that this will be the big reset, and that we will be coming back out of this pandemic more empathetic and just ready to build back better and be more inclusive.
Build Back Better was actually the theme of International Day of People with Disabilities.
It was indeed.
Christina, final thoughts?
I look at the opportunities that have arisen in the last year. We have suddenly disabled speakers keynoting at conferences that they never would have attended before. We have the voice being able to be in the room because we can be. Don't forget digital inclusion, but remember, people who are not like you and who don't think like you do are going to make your life richer. And I just keep coming back to that. I keep thinking, what are you doing to make sure that the person that comes after you in your position is a disabled person? And if they're not a disabled person, why not?
I love that centering. So I have about 15 seconds to share all the takeaways from this amazing conversation. I think what I'm taking away from it, and again, I'm going to echo what Charlotte said around watching Crip Camp, was Crip Camp to me wasn't just a film about disability advocacy. It was about a bunch of teenagers, pranks on each other. There was romance. They were having fun. And that just really highlights the human experience of what it means to be disabled. Another theme that I heard throughout this conversation, and there's a phrase that I often use a lot, and it's ending discrimination starts with self-reflection. And what I mean by that is I think that we actually need to turn the mirror on ourselves sometimes and really think about, and again, back to Charlotte's point, why do I feel uncomfortable seeing the physical manifestation of disability? Does that root back to experiences that I had as a child or that were reinforced in the media? I think this ties into what Martin said around needing to highlight diverse disability narratives in our own words, right? Taking control of that narrative, using the power of social media in order to show both disabled people, you know, we can't be what we can't see. And now if we see it, we can aspire and dream bigger, but also to show our non-disabled allies that these are the incredible things that we can achieve. And then Charlotte also mentioned all of the leaders, all of the disability leaders, and how things are getting better. And then I want to close on Christina's point of really viewing disability as an asset. We have an incredible panel here of 4 people, I'll include myself, who are all disabled and proud of our disabilities, right? And for us to go around and have society, I think, look at us through an ableist lens. Oh, are we over time? Oh, no, that was in solidarity. I'm sorry. But yeah, I think it's this idea of like, how can we really like start to reprogram our own narrative of how we see disability by meeting people like Charlotte and Christina and Martin and having those positive disability role models. So we're going to close the session here. Thank you for being part of this. You can use the hashtag non-obvious summit. Did I get that right? We might need to edit that. Oh yeah, sorry. The hashtag is nonobviousdiversity. Tweet at us. You can follow. Let us know what your takeaways were from this conversation. And thank you so much for joining us.